Welcome to my channel, The Silent Horror. Welcome, brave souls. It's The Silent Horror, your sanctuary for tales that unravel the darkest corners of the mind and the quietest fears that lurk beneath the surface. We explore horror not just as a genre, but as an experience, a journey into the silence that screams. Subscribe and let's step together into the shadows where true terror dwells. In the quietest moments, when the world feels still and safe, that's when fear creeps. In the deepest, it's not the loud screams or flashing lights that haunt us, it's the silence. The unknown. The shadows that whispered just beyond sight. Are you ready to face the stories that chill your soul and linger in your mind long after the lights go out? Dr. Lillian Rourke had read the dossier twice before the facility came into view, once on the plane, and again during the long, twisting drive through the forest. Still, nothing in the files could prepare her for how quiet it would be. Black. Pine Research Facility didn't look like it belonged in the 21st century. Perched at the edge of a dense coniferous forest in Vermont, the building rose in brutalist slabs of gray concrete, with moss creeping between cracks in the stone. There were no guards at the front gate, no staff waiting with clipboards or greetings. Just the distant hum of electricity and the crunch of gravel under Lillian's boots. She paused at the front door. A tall, reinforced metal frame with a security pad embedded to the right. She entered her ID number. The door hissed, unlocked, and swung inward with surprising ease. Inside, the air was still, sterile, cold. She walked down the long central hallway, fluorescent lights flickering gently above her. On either side were closed doors, unmarked and uniform. Only at the far end was there movement. A tall, reedy man in a lab coat stood by an elevator, checking a clipboard. "You're Dr. Rourke?" he asked, without looking up. She nodded. "Yes, just arrived." He handed her a visitor badge and a key card. "Surveillance suite is in sublevel 2. Subject A33 is already 10 days into the study. Your shift begins immediately." She blinked. "No orientation." "You read the files. That's the orientation." The man finally looked up. His eyes were rimmed with red, his skin pale, tired. "One rule, do not enter the mirror room ever. Observation only. No physical contact." Lillian hesitated. "Wasn't in the report, it is now." The elevator doors closed before she could ask more. The man didn't give his name. The surveillance suite was a cold, windowless room lined with monitors and switches. A single desk, one office chair, and an ever-buzzing fluorescent bulb above gave it the vibe of a forgotten security station. The central monitor displayed Subject A33 in real time. He was seated cross-legged on the floor of a modestly furnished room, concrete walls, a single bed, a table with a few books, and a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror mounted on the far wall. The mirror was unsettling, not because of its size or placement, but because it seemed too clean. Impossibly so. It had no frame, no seams, no signs of mounting hardware. It just was, as if it had grown out of the wall. Lillian watched as the subject tilted his head, then looked directly into the mirror. He didn't move for nearly 5 minutes. She leaned closer. The reflection was perfect to perfect. It matched his every breath, every subtle twitch of a finger. But something felt off. A hesitation, maybe a delay. She chalked it up to her. Imagination? Jet lag? Nothing more. She pressed the intercom button. "Subject A33. This is Dr. Rourke. I'll be your lead observer. How are you feeling today?" There was a pause. Subject blinked. His lips moved slowly. "Still here," he said, eyes fixed on the mirror. "Still me." Lillian reviewed the logbooks. 10 days in isolation, no reported anomalies. Vital. Signs normal. Subject showed mild signs of sleep deprivation and spoke infrequently. It's mostly to the mirror or to himself. The facility's systems logged everything automatically. Audio, visual, biometric data. Yet there was a curious note from the previous observer, filed on day 7. Subject appears to interact with the mirror as though expecting a different response. Not a reflection. A reply. Lillian frowned. She scrolled further. Day 8, 9, and 10 had no notes. Just a final message on the morning of day 10, requesting reassignment. I've started seeing the delay in everything. Even outside, I think it's spreading. The name of the observer had been redacted. Later that night, Lillian watched the live feed again. The subject hadn't moved in over an hour. His gaze stayed fixed on the mirror. At one point, he lifted his hand and waved gently. Test, maybe. A game, the reflection followed, but not quite in sync. It was subtle. A fluttering lag like a video buffering at low speed. But there it was. Lillian rubbed her eyes. Check that. Playback. In the saved footage, the reflection was perfectly timed. Identical. No lag, no delay. But Liv. She saw it again, split second off. As if the man and his mirror image were out of rhythm, struggling to keep pace with each other, she stood abruptly, pushing away from the monitor. The chair creaked behind her, loud in the silence. No technical malfunction, she muttered. Recalling the man's words upstairs. But what if it wasn't a technical issue? What if the mirror wasn't a mirror at all? She walked to the adjacent console and pulled up the schematics of room A33. The mirror wall had no backside. No camera, no wiring. It's just a note labeled, Experimental Observation Panel. Level black clearance required. Her keycard didn't grant access. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. The man in the room stood up suddenly. Walked to the mirror, placed his hand against the surface. His reflection followed. Then, just for a moment, his reflection smiled. He did not. Lillian froze. The moment passed. The subject turned away, lay down on the bed. She rewound the footage in the recording. Both the man and the reflection smiled at the same time. Exactly perfectly, she stayed up most of the night. Something was wrong, not just with the subject. Not just with the mirror. Something about this place sits silence. Its rules. Its lack of context felt engineered, controlled. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the vending machine down the hall. It tasted metallic. Old as she returned to the surveillance room, she caught her own reflection in the dark monitor screens, and for just a second, it blinked a beat too late. The morning came, though the sun never quite reached the subterranean. Walls of black pine. Lillian stirred awake on the small cot they'd given her adjacent to the surveillance suite. It was less of a bedroom and more of a janitor's, closet with a blanket. Her first act of the day, watch the feed, subject A33, was already awake. Or had he ever slept? He sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, hands dangling between his knees. He was murmuring something. His eyes were hollow, ringed with bruised crescents. Lillian unmuted the audio. No, you're slower now. Just a breath slower. You do it on purpose. You want me to see it? She blinked. Who are you talking to? She asked through the intercom. A 33 turned toward the ceiling-mounted speaker slowly. Still me, he said, voice rough and low. But sometimes, I don't think it is. He turned back to the mirror. Lillian logged the exchange. It was early, but something was wrong. Already the subject's mental state appeared to be declining faster than projected. Paranoia, insomnia, disassociation, the usual suspects, but compressed into just 10 days. She made coffee, took a shower, and returned to her post. The feed played on loop while she reviewed the psychological benchmarks taken during a 33's initial days. Normal. Responses to isolation. Cravings for social contact. Some verbal hallucinations. Mild sleep cycle disruption. But now he wasn't hallucinating. He was conversing. More than once, she saw his lips move without sound, followed by a smile from the mirror. Always. A beat too late. At 12:45 p.m., Lillian took a risk. She rewound the live footage, playing a segment from the last hour, side by side. With the current live feed, same actions. Same setting, but different outcomes. In the recording, 33 approached the mirror and simply stood before it, in the live feed. At that exact same moment, his reflection raised its hand first half a second before he did. She felt her stomach lurch. She paused the feed. The reflections weren't delayed anymore. They were out of order. She typed an incident report, flagging the footage for immediate review. As soon as she hit send, the screen flickered. Just for a moment, her message disappeared. No. Record, no confirmation, only a blank box where her entry had been. Lillian stepped into the hallway, heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. The overhead lights buzzed slightly. A hum that hadn't been there yesterday. She tried the elevator. It was disabled. An emergency staircase took her to the first floor, where she sought out the tech office. The room was dark, empty. Still no staff, no sign of the man who greeted her the day before. She picked up the desk phone. Deadline, back in the surveillance suite. She opened the old analog equipment cabinet. Dozens of VHS tapes were stacked inside, dusty and disorganized. Each labeled with handwritten codes, a 12, a 27, a -33. She pulled out one marked, a 33-day one. Plugging it into the ancient player, she stared at the screen. Subject A33 stood in the center of the room, staring into the mirror, as if he'd been waiting for it to turn on. He waved. He smiled, and his reflection didn't smile back. Not until 3 seconds later. Not a glitch. A choice. She switched off the tape. When she looked up, her own reflection in the monitor across from her tilted its head. She had not. That night, she couldn't sleep, not from fear, though that would come but from fixation. She made it her mission to observe the mirror itself. Not the subject, not the behavior logs. The mirror. She began noting the delay patterns. First it was milliseconds, then longer. But it was more than time lag. The reflection sometimes responded in ways that didn't match. On day 11 of a 33's, Loggy had waved with his right hand. The reflection waved with its left. 2:13 a.m. a -33 approached. Mirror again. He pressed his forehead to it, whispering inaudibly. Then he began to laugh a deep, guttural sound like something had cracked inside him. Lillian watched in fascinated horror as his laughter faded. But the reflection kept laughing. Then the reflection stepped back. The real. A33 did not. She gasped, mouth open, hand trembling over the keyboard. What? The hell? It only lasted a moment. The sync corrected. Both man and reflection stood still again, breathing in perfect unity. But it was too late. She'd seen it. The mirror was no longer reflecting. It was observing, she wrote up. Second incident report. This time she printed it, sealing the pages in an envelope. She slid it into her coat pocket. The system was eating her messages. She'd document it physically. She would go upstairs, call someone, anyone, the elevator. Still didn't work, so she climbed the stairs. When she reached the top floor, the hallway was dark. The lights, which had always flickered but stayed on, were dead. Every door stood slightly ajar. She peered into one office. The chairs were overturned. Dust hung in the air. There were no signs of life. No staff. No personal items. It was as if no one had ever been there. Back in the surveillance room. The feed was still running, but now. She was no longer looking at subject A-33. She was looking at herself, her own face, her own office. She sat at the desk, watching a monitor, and in the corner of the monitor subject, A33 stared at her. She blinked. The feed cut to black. When it returned, A33 was back, in his room, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just seen her own image on a feed. That shouldn't exist. She shut off the monitor. Her hands were shaking. The intercom buzzed. It had never done that on its own. She stared at the button. Dr. Ruark, a voice whispered through the speaker. It was her own. Don't look at the mirror. It's already looking at you. Dr. Lillian Rourke didn't sleep. Couldn't. She sat in the surveillance room, the lights off now. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders, more for comfort than warmth. The only illumination came from the flickering. Screens humming softly like lullabies with a dissonant note underneath. She kept one eye on the monitor. The other, she kept on her reflection in the black screen beside it. The intercom hadn't buzzed again. Her voice hadn't returned, but the damage had already been done. Subject A33 hadn't blinked in over 5 hours. Lillian had started counting, minute after minute, hour after hour. He sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, staring into it like it held all the answers. His eyes were wide and wet, but never fluttered. She fast-forwarded through the footage to confirm. No blinking. Not once. Not even a twitch. Even the human. Body has limits. She knew that. The eyes dry, the muscles spasm. Blinking is involuntary, unless something else had taken over. She opened a second screen and checked. The biometric data. Heart rate steady. Blood pressure low, but normal. Body temperature a bit colder than it should be. No indication of extreme stress, but his pupils. She zoomed in. They were dilated too wide, too round, as if reacting to darkness. But the room was fully lit. They looked black. Not just pupils. Empty. Like deep wells with no bottom. She backed away from the desk and checked her reflection in the glass panel of the equipment rack. She blinked. It didn't. She spun around, heart hammering. The reflection still stared at her, but it hadn't followed her movement. It remained seated, mirroring her original position from seconds ago. Then, too, Laytit shifted, sinking back into place like a delayed video catching up to live. She touched her cheek. The cold sweat on her palm felt real. Her reflection smiled. She didn't, Lillian. Left the surveillance suite and wandered the facility in silence. The upper floors were still empty. Not abandoned, not trash, just paused. As if the people had stepped out for a meeting they never came back from. She opened an office near the east wing. A nameplate had been torn off the door. Inside was a small desk, a file cabinet, and a dusty CRT monitor. On a whim, she booted it up. Static. Then a login prompt. She tried her credentials. Access denied. But the system blink flickered on. The desktop opened. Anyway, there was only one folder, unblinking _logs. She opened the first file. Subject. A08 final entry. The mirror doesn't wait for you. It learns you. And when it knows enough, it decides what you'll do. Sometimes it shows you ahead of time, not to warn you, to prove it's already happened. She opened another. A 19 exit attempt failed. She walked away from the mirror. But her reflection stayed. I watched it wave goodbye. The final file was just a video. No title. No date. She pressed play. The video was in grayscale, filmed from inside the mirror room. A woman stood with her back to the camera, facing the mirror. Her posture was identical to Lillian's. The clothes were identical. Even the way she shifted, her weight from foot to foot, it was like watching herself in an old dream in the reflection. The mirror woman smiled. Then she blinked, but the woman in the room did not. Lillian closed the file. Her breath was shallow, rapid. Her head throbbed with pressure, like air trying to escape from behind her eyes. Back in the surveillance suite, Subject A33 had changed position. He now stood directly in front of the mirror, nose nearly pressed to the glass. The camera's audio crackled, a hiss, then faint words. Don't blink. It notices. It remembers the last time you did. She leaned in. Who notices? She asked softly into the mic. The subject didn't move, but the whisper returned, louder this time. You notice you always do. Suddenly, A33 turned to the camera, not slowly, violently, as if yanked by something unseen. He stared directly, into the lens. His mouth moved, but the audio cut out entirely. Lillian turned up the volume. Nothing, then dashed behind her a whisper in the surveillance room. She turned. No one was there. The speakers were off, but the whisper had been real. Hadn't. The screen glitched. A33's image stuttered like a scratched DVD. Horizontal bands of distortion rolled across the monitor. When the image stabilized, it was gone. The room was empty. Only the mirror remained. The camera hadn't cut out. He had simply vanished. She waited seconds, minutes. He didn't come back. Instead, Something else did. A shape appeared in the reflection knot, where the mirror should reflect anything. But deep inside the surface, like it had emerged from beneath, a dark silhouette. Featureless. Perfectly still. Then it blinked. Twice. Lillian stumbled back. On screen, the silhouette began walking slowly toward the front, the glass toward her. Then the monitor shut off. Lillian ran to the door locked. She slammed her badge against the reader. Nothing. She pounded with her fists. But the steel held fast. When she turned around, the monitor was back on. A 33 sat calmly in the room again. He turned to face her, and in a voice perfectly matching hers, he spoke. "Stop watching. You're next." Lillian fell into the chair, gasping, her eyes burned. She tried to blink, but found herself resisting it. A horrible thought gripped her. What if blinking let it in? What if blinking reset something? She forced herself to blink. Just once on the screen, the reflection of a 33 blinked. But the real man did not. The facility was breathing, not literally, of course, but Lillian could hear it. A deep, slow pulse thrummed through the walls, barely perceptible, like the low hum of a forgotten machine. It pulsed in rhythm with the flickering lights overhead. It's not steady, organic. Wrong, Lillian hadn't left the surveillance suite in nearly a day, maybe longer. Time was collapsing in on itself, folding her into moments she no longer trusted. Subject A33 hadn't spoken in hours, but he was listening. She could see it in the way he tilted his head toward the mirror, not toward his reflection, but toward the glass itself, like it was saying something only he could hear. And now she could hear it too. It started as a faint ringing in her ears, an old childhood tinnitus she'd long forgotten. But beneath the static hiss, there were syllables, shapes of words. Not full sentences at first, just fragments spoken in breathless tones. "Behind you, still watching. Don't turn around." Her breath hitched. She spun in her chair reflex. Nothing, no one. Just her own pale reflection in the surveillance room's dark window, gazing back at her, except it didn't gaze. It stared, fixed, focused, as if it were waiting for her to move, to break the sync. She didn't blink. Neither did it. But something had changed. The reflection's mouth was slightly parted. Hers wasn't. She turned off the monitors. One by one, still the whispering continued. No speakers were on, no feeds live. The sound was coming from the mirror in Subject A33's room. She was sure of it now. It wasn't bouncing back sound. It was creating it. At 3:12 a.m., she did something she swore she wouldn't do. She re-enabled the mic on A33's room and whispered, "What is it saying to you?" The man stirred for the first time in hours. He didn't look at the mirror this time. He looked up directly into the ceiling, right where the speaker was mounted. His voice was thin. "Flat, it says. I'm not the first." Lillian swallowed. It was the first. He shook his head slowly. No names, only echoes. She shivered at the word echoes. Lillian opened the file system again. She searched the archives for references to Subject A33 prior to her assignment. Nothing. No intake form, no identity logs, no emergency contacts. Just a 33 and a biometric profile. She checked older subject logs A32, a 31. Back to A01. All gone, corrupted, redacted, deleted. She searched the servers hidden. Folders using command line tools. One file popped up, Mirror WHSPR, a hidden audio file. She pressed play for the first few seconds. There was only static then. A whisper too close to the mic. "It doesn't show your reflection. It shows the version of you that will replace you. It's the one that's already learned how to be you." Lillian slammed the laptop shut. She didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at her own reflection in the window glass, watching it with the suspicion of someone sitting across from a ticking bomb. She slowly raised her hand. The reflection followed, but its movements were slightly out of time. Like it was hesitating, thinking. She lowered her hand. The reflection kept its hand up, just a second too long. Subject to 33 began to hum. Not a melody, not music. A droning harmonic tone like a choir underwater. It vibrated through the speakers. Low and mournful. Then he began speaking again. She's still in there. Lillian leaned forward. Who? The first one who didn't blink. They left her behind the glass. A cold prickle slid down Lillian's spine. What happened to her? She learned the rhythm. The right time to pretend to blink, the right way to smile without meaning it. He turned toward the mirror. She's closer now. I think she found the crack. Lillian replayed the footage from an hour earlier in the playback, the mirror surface. Shimmered only for a moment, but undeniably. Strange warping, like a ripple across water. It wasn't a reflection glitch. It was a distortion, and when she slowed it down frame by frame, she saw something impossible. Behind the reflection of a 33 just barely visible in the darkness of the mirrored world was another face. It didn't belong to a -33 or her. It was watching both. She pushed away from the monitor. She was breathing too fast. Blinking too often now, trying to feel normal. Like testing a wound you can't see, then the whispering started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the speaker. It was coming from the mirror across the room, the one she'd covered with a coat earlier. She approached it. Her own reflection waited, arms at her side, head tilted slightly like a 33's. She leaned in. The whisper was louder now, but not distinct. Words crashed over each other, dozens of voices talking in overlapping layers. Then one phrase emerged. Clearly spoken in her voice, "It's learning how to sound like you." She backed away, heart pounding. She had to get out. Escape. Get to the upper floors, find a signal. Call someone. The elevator dead, the stairs still. Led to empty corridors. She burst into the first floor commons area. The windows were boarded from the outside. Not screwed. In-sealed. Black foam poured into the edges, as if to muffle sound. Had they been sealed from the inside? A loud bang echoed from the surveillance suite below. She ran back. Subject A33 was no longer in his bed. He was standing in the corner of the room, facing away from the mirror now, on the wall. Written in thick, smeared letters wasn't there. Before were 4 words. You've already blinked. Lillian felt a pressure in her eyes. She touched her face. They were wet. Had she? On the screen, A33's reflection stood. Alone in the mirror, the real man was gone again, and the reflection had turned, faced the camera, and smiled. Not the thin, haunted smile of the subject she'd been observing, but her smile, the exact curl of her lips, the small scar on her chin. It was her face now, but behind the glass. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. The reflection's smile deepened, slow and deliberate, a predator's grin masquerading as familiarity. Her hands shook, uncontrollably, as she stared into the glass. It wasn't just a mirror anymore. It was a window, a fissure into something warped and hungry. The thought echoed through her mind. You've already blinked. The surveillance room felt impossibly cold. Lillian wrapped her arms around herself and fought the urge to close her eyes. Every instinct screamed to blink, to refresh, to reset. But something inside whispered that blinking was surrender. She paced, searching for logic in the madness. Could this be a psychological break? An elaborate hallucination born from isolation? She wanted to believe it, but the files, the glitches, the whispered voices, none fit a simple explanation. She grabbed a pen and notebook from the supply closet. Desperate to ground herself, she scribbled furiously. The mirror is not a mirror. It's a doorway, a prison, a predator. The delay is not lag, it's time shifting. Reflections are echoes, and I'm not sure which one is real anymore. Her phone, the only connection to the outside world, remained dead. No signal, no calls, no emails. The whole facility was a vacuum, sealed away from everything. She remembered the emergency stairs. She had barely made it a floor before the oppressive silence pushed her back. No footsteps, no voices, no life, only the whispering. That whispering had become a constant drone now, indistinguishable from her own thoughts. She tried to will it away, Tried to focus on a 33, he was back on the feed, seated on his bed. But something was off. His face was fractured, the image breaking apart in shards like cracked glass. Each shard showed a different expression: fear, rage, sorrow, joy, flickering. In impossible sequences, she tried to call him over the intercom. No response. Suddenly, the power flickered. The feed froze. Lillian's heart hammered. The screens went black. A moment later, the emergency lights bathed the room in harsh red. Then the cameras came back, but the image was distorted. On the screen, A33's room was empty, except the mirror was shattered, cracked spider webbing across the glass. Reflecting the red glow, back at her and inside the broken glass, a figure, not a 33, not a reflection, but her, Lillian. Stumbled backward, she pressed the emergency button. No response. Her breath caught again as the figure in the mirror raised a hand. Slow, deliberate. Mouthed words she felt rather than heard. "It's not over." Her eyes stung. She wiped her face. The tears kept coming. She looked back at the monitor. The figure smiled again. Smile too perfect. Then the screen went black. Silence engulfed the facility. The hum had stopped. No whispering. No. Flickering, just the cold. Its heavy stillness. Then the door unlocked. Lillian spun around. The corridor was empty, but the air smelled different. Sharp and metallic. She stepped out cautiously. A faint light flickered down the hall. The facility was waking, or something inside it was. Lillian hesitated at the threshold of the corridor. Her breath shallow and rapid, heart pounding like a trapped bird, desperate for escape. The door had unlocked on its own, but no one waited beyond it. The silence pressing down was heavier than ever, thick, suffocating, as if the very air refused to move. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself forward, driven by an urgent need to understand what had been happening in this place. Each step echoed hollowly down the hall, bouncing back at her like ghostly whispers. The facility, once sterile and clinical, now felt like a living thing, watching, waiting, hungry. The faint flickering light ahead drew her closer, guiding her deeper into the belly of the unknown. She reached the source of the glow, a small room she hadn't noticed before. It's tucked away beyond a security door that now hung ajar. The walls were lined with mirrors floor to ceiling, reflecting her. Image back at her again and again, multiplied infinitely. The reflections shimmered strangely, distorting and bending as though the glass was warped, or perhaps breathing. Lillian's skin prickled with unease. This was no ordinary chamber. It was a labyrinth of glass, a prison of reflections. The door behind her clicked shut suddenly, and she spun around, heart thundering. There was no way out, no visible handle. She was trapped with 1,000 versions of herself staring back from every angle, some blinking, some smiling, some weeping silently. Her mind reeled. The phrase from the old logs echoed in her thoughts. The mirror doesn't show your reflection. It shows the version of you that will replace you. A cold realization settled over her. She was no longer simply an observer. She was becoming the observed, the subject of the mirror's twisted experiment. Her own reflection moved with a lag, a delay so subtle it could be mistaken for a trick of the eye, but Lillian knew better now. It was deliberate. The image was learning her movements, mirroring not just her form but her essence, step by step, thought by thought. Panic surged as she realized she could no longer trust the version of herself she saw. Desperately, she reached out and touched the glass of the nearest mirror. The surface was icy cold, unnervingly smooth like liquid. For a moment, her fingers pressed against the glass and the reflection's hand touched hers back, but then it hesitated, pulling away just a fraction of a second too late. Lillian jerked her hand back, heart racing. The delay was growing, spreading like a virus across all the reflections. They moved out of sync, slipping into moments she hadn't yet lived. Some reflections blinked before she did, others smiled. Just after her, and a few stared blankly, unblinking, as if they were waiting for something or someone. She felt a creeping terror that the mirrors weren't just passive surfaces, but gateways. Portals between realities, between time itself. Then, the whispers began again, faint at first, swirling through the room like a cold wind brushing her ear. It wasn't one voice, but many a chorus of echoes overlapping, murmuring in voices both familiar and alien. The words were fragmented but chillingly clear. You are the delay, the reflection learns. The reflection waits, not to blink, is to lose yourself. Her skin crawled as the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, coalescing inside the glass panes. Figures half-formed, half-real began to appear within the mirrors. They were distorted versions of herself, eyes hollow or gleaming with unnatural light, mouths twisted into expressions she had never worn. They watched her with unblinking stares, waiting silently, her breath hitched. She turned away from the mirrors and tried the door, locked tight, no handle, no windows. The walls seemed to close in, pressing toward her, where she realized she was caught not just physically but mentally, as if the mirrors had extended their reach into her mind. Memories flickered, unbidden visions of faces she'd never seen, places she'd never been, and moments yet to come. A crushing sense of déjà vu overwhelmed her, as if she were living the same second repeatedly, always one step behind her own reflection. The room grew colder. Her limbs felt heavy, slow, her thoughts fragmented like shattered glass. In a sudden burst of clarity, she slammed her fist against the nearest mirror. The glass rippled under her touch, waves spreading outward like water disturbed by a stone. The whispers intensified, voices overlapping into a cacophony. Then, as if the glass had become a veil, the mirror's surface began to warp, bending and melting, revealing a shadowy passage beyond. The reflections vanished, swallowed into darkness. Without hesitation, driven by a mixture of dread and desperate hope, Lillian stepped through the mirror's surface. The cold embrace of the other side was immediate. It was like plunging into deep water cold, suffocating, disorienting. World around her shifted, a distorted echo of the facility she'd known. The walls here were warped, colors twisted into unnatural hues. Sounds were muffled, voices distorted and slowed. She was inside the reflection, inside the delay. Ahead, she saw a figure standing in a shadowed corridor, the outline familiar yet unsettling. It was a 33, but not the broken man she'd watched. This version was calm, collected, eyes steady and unblinking. He turned slowly, face half in shadow, and spoke in a voice that was both his and not his. You came through. Lillian's throat tightened. Where am I? Between moments, he said. Between realities. The delay is the gap where we exist when the world forgets us. The mirror doesn't just reflect it, captures fragments of time and traps the soul inside. You're in the fracture now. She swallowed hard. How do I get back? 33 smiled a smile heavy with sorrow. You don't. Not the same way. Here, the rules are different. You're untethered from time's flow. Every blink, every hesitation fractures your being further. You become a shadow, a ghost in the glass. You either embrace the delay or you shatter. Her heart pounded louder than ever. I won't become a ghost. He stepped closer, the shadows swirling around him like smoke. That's what everyone says, until the delay teaches you otherwise. The walls seemed to pulse, reflections multiplying around them, each one a possible future, a trapped past. Lillian realized with a sudden chill that this was not just a place, but a prison built from her own fear and hesitation. The mirror's power wasn't just to trap Bodhisattva ensnared minds and souls. Feeding on the fracture within, she clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down, and then did something she never thought she could. Blinked, the world around her shattered like broken glass, fragments of reality spinning in every direction. And in that moment of darkness, she understood the true nature of the delay. It wasn't just a pause in time, it was a space between selves. Between the self you see and the self that waits to replace you. When her eyes opened, she was back in the surveillance room. The monitors flickered weakly, the soft hum of the facility returning. The mirror across the room was still, lifeless. reflecting only the empty room behind her. But Lillian knew better. The delay was waiting, and so was the man inside it. Lillian awoke in a cold sweat. Cut. The echo of the mirror's fractured world still lingering like a ghost in her mind. The familiar walls of her small living quarters inside the facility offered little comfort. They seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the growing unease in her chest. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but it felt ... off. Not quite aligned with her perception of time. Minutes seemed to stretch endlessly, then snap back in jerky bursts. The delay was no longer confined to the mirrored room, it had infected the very flow of her existence. She rose and crossed the room, eyes drawn involuntarily to the small handheld recorder she had started using to document everything: the whispers, the shadows, the impossible movements. She pressed play. Her voice echoed back to her, trembling and fragmented, overlapped by faint, indecipherable whispers beneath. Lillian shuddered. The recordings weren't just capturing her voice, they were trapping something else, some residual presence layered beneath her own words. It was as if the delay wasn't just temporal, but a persistent echo in space. A shadow that clung to sound and memory. Her attention snapped to the monitor feeds. Subject A33's room was dark. The mirror stood intact, unbroken, its surface smooth and deceptively calm. But beneath the stillness, Lillian felt a simmering tension. She reached for the intercom and called out softly, "A 33? Are you there?" Silence. Then faint at first, a low humming, like the drone of a distant choir, emerged. It grew steadily, threading through the room, weaving into the air itself. The monitor flickered and revealed a faint silhouette inside the mirror's reflection. A figure moving with unnatural grace. It wasn't a 33, nor was it Lillian. The shape shifted, blurring between identities, a kaleidoscope of faces layered atop one another, each distorted and desperate. Lillian's heart raced. The whispers returned louder this time, overlapping voices rising in a spectral crescendo. She leaned closer to the screen, straining to hear the words beneath the chaotic murmurs. Then, cutting through the noise like a knife, a single phrase, repeated, "Remember the delay." The phrase struck her like a revelation. Delay wasn't merely a gap or a glitch, it was a message, a warning encoded in the fabric of the mirror's influence. The past, present, and future were folding into one another, creating a loop where memories, fears, and identities collided and distorted. The subject, the observer, the reflection, they were becoming indistinguishable. Lillian closed her eyes, trying to steady her thoughts, but the echo of that phrase continued reverberating in her mind. She opened them to find the room subtly altered. The shadows lengthened, deepening unnaturally, and the ambient hum thickened to a palpable presence pressing against her skin. She wasn't alone. Suddenly, the door to the surveillance room clicked. She whirled around. No one was there, or at least no one visible. But the air grew colder. Whispers morphed into distinct words, spoken clearly in a voice that was unmistakably hers, yet warped. "You are the echo." Lillian's reflection shimmered in the darkened glass of the monitor. Slowly, the image smiled a smile, too slow, too deliberate, curling into a mockery of her own. She felt an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest, as if the very space around her conspired to erase her presence, to fold her into the echo itself. Desperation flooded her. She lunged for the recorder and played back the last few hours of audio. The voices swelled in unison, a haunting symphony of despair and hope intertwined, cycling endlessly through layers of time and space. Her eyes scanned the notes she had, made fragments of conversations, fleeting images, corrupted data. Each line hinted at a truth too terrible to face outright. The facility was a crucible, designed to trap consciousness within the delay. Feeding off fractured selves caught between moments, she realized with growing horror that Subject A33 was not a victim, but a warning, a glimpse of what awaited anyone who succumbed to the mirror's call. His whispers about the first who never blinked, the versions left behind. The cracks widening, these were not random delusions. They were echoes of fractured realities bleeding through the thin veneer of time. Summoning her courage, Lillian turned once more to the mirror in R33's room via the monitors. The surface rippled faintly as if alive, responding to her gaze. The figure within emerged again, clearer now, a version of herself, eyes hollow and desperate, reaching out beyond the glass. "Help me," the reflection mouthed, voice lost. In the static, Lillian's heart shattered. Was this her fate? To become trapped in the delay, an echo repeating endlessly behind the glass? Her resolve hardened. She had to find a way to break the cycle, to sever the delay before it consumed her completely. But as she reached for the intercom, the whispers crescendoed, drowning out her voice, drowning out her thoughts. The walls trembled, the lights flickered, the shadows closed in. The delay was no longer waiting. It was here. The moment the whispers swelled into a deafening roar. Lillian's world fractured, her vision blurred, flickering like a broken film. Real, and the boundaries between the surveillance room and the mirrored chamber began to dissolve. The cold, mechanical hum of the facility was replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed against her eardrums. The lights overhead dimmed and pulsed erratically, casting long, grotesque shadows that writhed across the walls like living things. She tried to steady herself, clutching the edge of the console, but her hand slipped as a wave of vertigo slammed into her. The monitors glitched wildly, displaying shards of distorted images, the 33's fractured face, impossible reflections that twisted and multiplied, flashes of scenes she didn't recognize. Empty hallways, faces melting into mirrors, rooms folding in on themselves. Her breathing quickened, shallow and desperate. Time itself seemed to buckle and warp, seconds stretching into eternity before snapping back like a taut wire. The whispers had become voices, distinct and overlapping, echoing from every direction. They spoke of delay and replacement, of watching and waiting, of blinking and losing. Lillian's eyes darted to the mirror in a 33's room, visible on the largest screen. The glass was no longer intact. Jagged cracks spider-webbed across its surface, but through the fractures, a dark figure emerged. It was her. Or something that looked like her, but the eyes were voids of shadow. The smile twisted into a cruel sneer. The reflection reached out, fingers clawing at the glass as if trying to escape. A cold dread seized Lillian's chest. This was the fracture she had glimpsed before, the moment where reality split and the delay consumed the self. The fractured reflections weren't just images. They were fragments of trapped souls, echoes of those who had blinked and been left behind. Suddenly, the door to the surveillance room slammed shut. She spun toward it, pounding her fists against the steel surface, but it held firm. The lights flickered once more, then went out completely, plunging her into darkness. Only the glow of the monitors remained, and the haunting smile of her fractured reflection. A voice whispered from the speakers, unmistakably her own, but warped, distorted. "You can't escape the delay. It's already inside you." Panic surged, and Lillian scrambled for the emergency flashlight. Its beam pierced the darkness, illuminating the room in stark contrast. But the beam caught on the mirror opposite her, the one she had covered with a coat days ago. The fabric had fallen away, revealing a surface blacker than night, a void that seemed to suck in the light. She stepped closer, heart hammering. The whispers crescendoed again, a choir of despair and warning. "Blink and you're lost." Her breath caught. She remembered the warning, the first who never blinked. The versions left behind, the delay itself a predator waiting in the moments between. With trembling fingers, she reached out to touch the glass. It rippled like water, cold, unnatural. Energy surged through her hand, crawling up her arm, freezing her in place. A voice, clear, calm, familiar, spoke directly in her mind. "Welcome to the other side." The world tilted. The room collapsed, and Lillian was pulled through the mirror's fractured surface. Into the delay itself, the moment Lillian was pulled through the mirror's fractured surface. The world she knew shattered into an endless void, No walls, no floors, no familiar hum of the facility. Only darkness so complete it pressed against her eyelids, thick as water. She felt herself falling, spiraling through a cold, weightless expanse that defied logic and time. Chirped, echoed inside her chest, hollow and sharp, but when she opened her mouth, no sound emerged. The silence was absolute, oppressive, as she plummeted deeper into the abyss. Shards of light flickered around her fragmented memories, half-formed images suspended in space, like fireflies in a summer night. Faces she recognized, places she barely remembered, moments she'd lived and moments she hadn't. Time splintered, looping back on itself, folding like paper into impossible shapes. A whispered voice trailed at the edges of her mind. You're between. You're lost. You are the delay. Lillian clenched her fists, willing herself not to sink into the void. But the delay was a weight around her ankles, dragging her deeper, faster. Shapes began to coalesce from the darkness, figures shifting between her reflection and A33's fractured self. Echoes of trapped consciousnesses flailing silently in the abyss. Their eyes were hollow, their faces flickering like broken projections, desperate to be seen, to be heard. One figure floated closer. It was A33, or what was left of him, his features blurred and cracked. Voice a rasping echo that vibrated in the nothingness. Welcome, he whispered. You've entered the fracture, the place where selves dissolve. Lillian's voice was hoarse but defiant. How do I get out? A33's shadowed face twisted into a bitter smile. There is no out. Only the choice to remain or to break. How? By blinking, he said. The word hit her like ice. Blink, the very act she had resisted since arriving. To blink here was to surrender, to shatter into fragments, to lose herself completely to the delay. Memories rushed into Majee's. Of herself fighting to hold on to identity, the mirror's cold grip pulling tighter each time her eyes fluttered. But staying awake was exhausting, a constant battle against an unseen force that sought to claim her mind. She felt it know, an irresistible pull toward darkness, a lullaby of oblivion. Suddenly, the abyss shifted. Corridor formed, stretching endlessly in both directions, lined with mirrors that reflected infinite versions of herself and A33, distorted and decayed. Each reflection whispered secrets and voices, both hers and not hers. Promises and threats intertwined. Lillian stepped forward. Breath shallow, the corridor stretching and bending with each movement. The reflections moved independently, some smiled mockingly, others wept silently, and a few reached toward her with fingers of glass. Don't trust the reflections, A33 warned. They want to trap you. They want to replace you. She nodded, heart pounding. Every step felt like a struggle against sinking sand, but she forced herself onward. At the corridor's end, a door shimmered into view, made entirely of fractured glass. It was her only hope, a passage that might lead back to reality. But as she reached out, the reflections surged forward, their voices rising into a frantic chorus. Blink, join us, be whole again. Her eyes stung. The delay's lure was intoxicating, promising rest, peace, the end of the fight. Lillian swallowed hard and forced her gaze away. I'm not done, she whispered. With trembling hands, she touched the door. The glass cracked, splintering like ice beneath her fingers. A cold wind blew through the corridor, carrying with it a rush of memories, flashes of laughter, fear, hope. Despair all mingled and distorted. The door shattered completely, revealing a blinding light beyond. Lillian stepped through. She landed, hard on cold metal, gasping for breath as the world snapped back into focus. She was in a dimly lit corridor of the facility, the real one, but something was wrong. The walls seemed warped, the lighting flickering. The hum of machinery was distant. Distorted, she staggered to her feet, clutching her head. The delay had left its mark. Her mind felt fractured, memories overlapping, reality bleeding into reflection. As she moved down the hallway, her footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. Doors appeared and disappeared, some leading to familiar rooms, others to endless voids. She reached the observation deck outside R33's room. The door was cracked open, light spilling into the corridor. Inside, the mirror hung whole again. But when she looked at her reflection, it wasn't her own face staring back. It was a 33's eyes, empty and haunting. Lillian stumbled back, heart racing.
Us.
The facility groaned, walls trembling as if alive. A voice whispered from behind the glass. Do you see now? The delay is not just a trap, it's a transformation. She pressed her palm against the mirror, and the glass rippled like water once more. Don't blink, the voice warned. Because if you do, the delay will claim you. You will become one of us. An echo, a fracture. The man in the delay, Lillian's eyes burned. She knew the fight was far from over. With resolve hardening like steel, she turned away from the mirror and stepped deeper into the facility's dark heart, determined to end the delay's curse, or be consumed by it forever. Lillian's footsteps echoed hollowly through the dim, twisting corridors of the research facility. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the hammering of her heart. Each step was a battle against the creeping sense of unraveling, the feeling that time itself was folding, bending and threatening to swallow her whole. The delay was alive inside her now, about a parasite feeding on her fears, her doubts, her very essence. She could feel it in every blink, every faltering breath. It whispered promises of escape, a piece of release from the nightmare, but she knew better. To give in would mean surrender, dissolution into the fractured reflections trapped behind the mirrors. Her goal was clear. Reach the core of the facility where the experiments had begun, the origin of the delay's power, and destroy it before. It claimed her completely as she approached the heavy blast doors to the main chamber. A cold wind swept through the hallway. The lights flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and danced like living things. Lillian's breath caught. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the facility itself waited to confront her. The door hissed open, revealing the chamber beyond, the vast room dominated by a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror, unlike any she had seen before. Its surface shimmered with a liquid silver glow, swirling and shifting like a living ocean.
Out in the room.
Countless smaller mirrors reflected fragments of the space, fracturing reality into a kaleidoscope of endless possibilities. In the center stood a figure cloaked in shadow, tall, indistinct, yet unmistakably human. The man in the delay. Lillian stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. Why? Why this experiment? What is this place? The figure's eyes gleamed with cold light.
Ow.
To understand time, to conquer it. The delay is the space between moments where reality fractures and possibilities multiply. We sought to harness that space, to trap consciousness there, to transcend the limits of existence. And at what cost? Lillian demanded. The lives you've shattered, the minds you've broken. The man smiled, a slow, chilling curve of lips. Sacrifice is necessary for progress. But you misunderstand, this is no mere prison. Is evolution. Those who enter the delay do not die. They become something new, echoes, guardians of the space between. Lillian's gaze hardened. You're wrong. You're trapping souls, tearing people apart. The figure stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper that resonated deep within her mind. You are already part of it, Lillian. The delay flows through you. Blink, and you will join us. Her eyes burned with defiance. Hush, I won't blink. Shh. A ripple ran across the great mirror's surface, and suddenly Lillian was no longer alone. In the chamber, reflections multiplied, countless versions of herself, fractured and distorted, reaching out with glassy hands. Their eyes were hollow, filled with silent pleas for release. Her heart twisted at their suffering. But she forced herself to focus. There has to be a way to end this, she said aloud, stepping toward the mirror's edge. And free everyone trapped inside. The man in the delay regarded her calmly. The core lies within the mirror. Destroy it, and you risk unraveling the fabric of time itself. Lillian swallowed her fear. I'd rather risk that than live. As a ghost? She raised her hand, reaching for a sharp shard of broken glass lying at her feet, a fragment from the fractured mirror she'd seen in A33's room. Glinted cruelly in the low light. As her fingers closed around it, the chamber shook violently. The reflections screamed silently, their forms flickering and distorting as the delay fought to hold its grip. The man in the delay vanished. Melting into the swirling surface of the great mirror, Lillian stepped forward and plunged the shard deep into the mirror's center. The surface rippled, then exploded in a shower of shattered light. The room trembled, walls cracking and twisting as the very fabric of reality tore apart. For a moment, she was lost in an endless void, silent, weightless expanse between moments. The whispers returned, now a gentle hum, a chorus of voices merging in harmony. You are free, you are whole, you have ended the delay. Then, with a sudden rush, Lillian was pulled back to the surveillance room, back to her body. She gasped, blinking for the first time in what felt like hours. The monitors flickered, then stabilized. The mirror across the room was cracked but silent, its malevolent presence gone. She sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. But beneath the fatigue, a spark of hope kindled. Days later, the facility was emptied and sealed. No more subjects. No more experiments. Lillian left, the weight of the delay lifting from her shoulders. But its echoes would remain memories etched deep in her mind. She knew the delay was a fracture in time, a reminder that every moment is fragile, every choice a threshold. And somewhere beyond the glass, the man in the delay still waits silent, patient, ever watching. But Lillian was free. For now, if you enjoyed this chilling tale and want to dive deeper into the world of silent fears and shadowed horrors, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a whisper from the silent horror. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I want to hear your darkest fears. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones you don't hear coming.